Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Greater Manchester Chamber Gubernatorial and Congressional Forum. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Mike Skelton from the Greater Manchester Chamber. So glad to have you join us virtually today. We very much wish we could be doing this in person, but we're equally excited to be doing this event in a different way, given the ongoing situation, and have a chance for you to hear directly from our candidates for governor in Congress on where they stand on some important business issues. We've got 4 interviews with candidates to get to today, so we're going to dive in as soon as we can. But first, I'd like to recognize our sponsors and thank them for their support in making this program possible. Our presenting sponsor is Bellwether Community Credit Union. Our advocate sponsors are Eversource and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And a big thank you to our AV partner, Events United and Studio Lab, for helping make this program possible in this virtual format. Speaking of the format today, I wanted to just share a little bit of how we're going to approach this. We're going to do 4 20-minute interviews with each candidate. And I have a series of questions that have been submitted by chamber members and are based on key business issues of interest to the chamber. We're going to talk to our congressional candidates first, and then get to the gubernatorial candidates after that with a 10-minute intermission in between. Some of the topics we're going to be talking about today include the COVID-19 pandemic, healthcare, energy costs, economic development, workforce development, transportation infrastructure. There are a lot of topics to get to. We're going to try and get to as many as we can. I apologize in advance if we don't get to every question. We had lots of interest and lots of questions submitted, so we're going to do our best to get to as many as we can. Before I dive into, I want to put a quick plug in for the Chamber's fall virtual programming that's coming up. There'll be some reminders about that in the comments of the live stream and, of course, on the Chamber website and in our e-news. We continue to be committed to bringing valuable Chamber content to you during these unique and extraordinary times. We have great partners like Events United and Studio Lab who have been helping us do so in a variety of formats. So please continue to join us for some of these great virtual opportunities, whether it's our EDI Summit later this fall or some of the other great programs that we'll be doing. But we really appreciate your continued engagement with the Chamber during these times. It's been great to connect with all of you, and thank you for all that you're doing to keep our business community moving forward. So with that, I think we can dive right in. Please join me in welcoming the Democratic nominee for Congress, Congressman Chris Pappas.
How are you?
Good. How are you, Congressman?
Good. Good morning. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you for being here. I know it is a really busy time right now with just more than a week to go. So we've got a lot of topics to get to. So I'd like to dive right in, see how many we can get to. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has been one of the overriding issues of this year and is on the mind of almost all voters. I'd like to start with the federal response to COVID-19. What do you see that has gone right, and what do you see that has gone wrong, and what do we need to be looking at going forward from a federal perspective?
Well, thanks, Mike, for this opportunity, and I appreciate the work of the Greater Manchester Chamber. You know, our business community in New Hampshire has proven innovative and resilient, but there are significant challenges that lie ahead, especially through these tough winter months. And the impact on our economy is uneven. We see some folks that are adjusting, are doing okay, but other sectors of our economy that are really struggling right now. So I think that the efforts to pass bipartisan legislation for bipartisan bills back in the spring was really significant. It pushed out a lot of resources that helped provide a financial lifeline to our local businesses, our hospitals, our communities to help weather this storm. And that's where our focus should be, on how we can redouble and refine these efforts. We know that they weren't perfect. And the feedback that I got from businesses across our state in March and April was really important to allow us to advocate for legislation that could refine the Paycheck Protection Program in particular. We not only got more resources out, we got it out through CDFIs and local credit unions to target our smallest businesses, and we made sure that the terms of the program were more flexible. We need a second round there to make sure that we can provide additional support for those who need that additional help moving forward. But the Federal Reserve Chair continues to tell us that the risk of Congress going too small is really great. They want to see us go big. And we've got to look at these expenditures as one-time expenses to get our economy up and running again. Now, we can't lose sight of the public health aspect of this either. And I think that's where the administration has fallen short, not trusting the scientists and ensuring that we're doing everything we can to have a national testing strategy. We've done better here in New Hampshire because I think people have been a lot more serious about the steps that we all need to take to keep people safe. But we can't just get complacent. We've got to stay vigilant, especially through these tough winter months, to keep these numbers low. That's going to allow us to not only head off a second hit to our economy, but ensure that our businesses can remain open. So we've got to get to a bipartisan deal. There are a lot of facets that are on the table of that deal, and I won't be satisfied till we get more help over the finish line.
I want to get to that bipartisan deal for a minute, but to follow up on the public health element of it, just over the weekend, we saw two of our highest recorded days of positive cases. And some of that is due to increased testing, of course, but we seem to be outpacing that. And thankfully here in the Northeast, we have been spared that resurgence thus far. But from a federal standpoint, I mean, where do you see the federal government needs to go, the administration needs to go to really get the virus under control so that, what tools should they be recommending or pushing out so that we can put all of our efforts towards those recovery efforts?
Sure. And certainly numbers have gone up. We've seen daily records several of the last recent days over the past week, and that's alarming. And we're seeing that happen in a number of states across this country. We've also seen hospitalizations increase by 40% across the country, which gives you an indication that this isn't just testing. This is more people getting sick as a result of this. So the testing, treatment, and contact tracing element of this is absolutely essential. And that has to be a central element of any deal that's passed. We need to get that help out there to our public health networks, our community health centers and hospitals to make sure they're ready for this. And we also have to make sure that we're taking care of our healthcare system generally. We saw just last week, Lakes Region General Healthcare file for bankruptcy. We have a lot of other hospitals and healthcare providers in our state that are losing money right now. And if they're not strong, they're not going to be able to confront the reality that we could potentially face this winter. So it's testing, treatment, and tracing. It's additional support for our hospitals. And it's making sure that we have the plan in place to deploy a vaccine when it's deemed safe and effective by FDA. We've got to crush this virus first and foremost, because if we don't, we're never going to get back to full employment. We're never going to get our economy back to where it needs to be.
So going back to the bipartisan talks around some sort of relief bill, another wave of relief, Speaker Pelosi has been negotiating directly with the administration, and there's been talk of finding an agreement before Election Day. If an agreement is put on the floor within the next week, is that something you're supportive of? Are you supportive of passing a relief bill, whether it's in the next couple days or any time thereafter?
As soon as possible. And whether it comes in a couple of days or it takes another week, whatever it takes to get something done. November 3rd is an artificial day. I know a lot of us think about it in terms of the political implications of it, but the virus has no idea what November 3rd is. Neither do our local businesses who are struggling or folks who might be sick from COVID right now. So that's why I'm frustrated that it's taken 5 months since we first passed the HEROES Act in the House to get us to this point. But look, the Secretary of the Treasury and the Speaker have been having positive negotiations. They've actually been getting some terms down on paper. So I think that provides us with an opportunity to act. But I say this, we shouldn't be waiting. If we can get support for testing and treatment in our businesses and our schools, let's move that forward and then maybe hash out the other areas if that takes a little bit longer. Because in this period of uncertainty, we've got to be providing as much certainty and as clear a path forward as we possibly can.
Great. I'd like to shift over to some other topics, starting with transportation and infrastructure. It's an important issue for us as a chamber, key backbone to economic growth. And, I'd like to hear just from your efforts of the past couple of years and also looking forward, how do you ensure that Congressional District 1 is getting the support it needs for key road and transit projects? I mean, I think the two priorities that come to mind for our organization are potentially passenger rail and also Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. So your perspective on delivering the support for those key priorities, which really drives economic development.
Sure. Well, the relief efforts have been really helpful to our airport, to Manchester Transit, and other local transit agencies across our state. They're dealing with fewer riders, lower revenues, And so we've got to make sure that we don't see either air or bus routes disappearing as a result of COVID, because we're going to need that service once the economy is back at full tilt. So any additional legislation needs to provide that direct support. But really, the conversation around transportation and infrastructure to date has really only been about how do we manage the experience we're going through. We've got to talk about how we put people back to work. And that's why I asked for a position on the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee. We've worked for the past 2 years developing legislation that actually passed the House back in June. Unfortunately, it appears there's only so much oxygen in Washington right now to deal with these things, and we did a short-term reauthorization of highway funding. But our bill would increase highway funding by 30%. That means more projects could be addressed here in New Hampshire and across the country. It provides significant additional support for new passenger rail routes, so that could really help us identify the federal sources we need to get the Capital Corridor project off the ground, which would be an economic game changer for central and southern New Hampshire. And I also have a provision in the bill that would create a new grant program for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So I think we really need to look at all modes. This is an opportunity where not only can we stimulate the economy and put people back to work, but we can rebuild for the future, do it in a cleaner and greener way, and do it in a way that creates community connections. You know, one of the things that the Chamber has focused so much on is our aging workforce, and how do we attract the young professionals we need to be taking jobs and putting down roots here in New Hampshire. Transportation is such a crucial component of that, and making sure that we have community amenities, including walkable, bikeable communities, is so important. And that's what we can accomplish through an infrastructure package. I'm hopeful we'll get there in January if the stars align.
That's a good segue to the next question I want to ask you about, which is workforce development. And as you indicated, it's a key priority for us. By far, workforce development prior to COVID-19 was the main challenge we were hearing from employers in terms of growing jobs and growing our economy. So aside from transportation, what are a couple of other policy priorities that you would like to see advanced in Congress that could help a state like New Hampshire attract and retain talent to its workforce?
Well, first, we have to address the high cost of education, higher education in New Hampshire. We provide the least amount of state support for our public university system, and that means a lot of young people go out of state to go to college, and then they start their careers and start their families in other places. We want to keep them right here in New Hampshire. So we've got to address the issue of affordability around higher education. I think we should be bringing down student loan rates and expanding Pell Grants to make sure that college is more affordable. And it's going to take the partnership of the state of New Hampshire to really ensure that our university system is well-funded, is attractive to in-state students. In addition to that, we have to work on the pipelines. And I've been touring a lot of manufacturers lately. Workforce challenges are as significant as they were even before this pandemic. In some instances, they've gotten worse because our manufacturers are ramping up production of critical supplies that we all need, but they don't have the workers to meet the demand. So it's important that we work through our high schools and career and technical education programs and our community colleges to create those pipelines. I'm supporting legislation that would invest $200 million in CTE programs and Perkins grants to make sure that we're seeing the cultural change we need to encourage people to go into the trades, to go into career and technical education, to get a degree at a community college and get right into the workforce. There are lucrative careers that people can pursue in manufacturing, in the trades, and other critical areas in our state. And we just really need to open the doors to our student population and make sure there's a warm handoff into the workforce right here in New Hampshire.
Switching to a different topic, healthcare has continued to dominate the election cycle as a much debated topic. It's obviously critical for families, workers, and businesses. And the uncertainty that the healthcare debate brings into the calculus for businesses is something that's difficult for them to plan for. You know, obviously the ACA, there's a lot of talk right now of it. It's in court, and the Supreme Court will be weighing in on it at some point. I guess, looking ahead, if you were to be part of Congress in the next session, what policies would you be putting forward, either to build on ACA because you think it's the right platform to build on, or if you're in the real repeal and replace mode, where do you see that going? And what's the solution here so we can get out of this period of uncertainty that we've been in seemingly for the past couple of election cycles?
Sure. Well, I think we should build on the Affordable Care Act. I think the essential benefits and the coverage that's protected under the ACA is really bedrock, and we should be moving beyond the political debate to focus on costs. And I think about this as someone who was an employer in Manchester and a chamber member, a restaurant owner. I know that my employees were more productive because they had access to the care that they needed. And we offered it long before the ACA came along because it was the right thing to do. And I think as a country, we're seeing through this pandemic that our health and well-being is all interconnected. And so making sure that someone gets vaccinated, that someone gets the care and treatment they need is not only more efficient and less costly for our healthcare system, but we're better off as a community as a result. So I think we really should focus on how we can build on the Affordable Care Act. We repealed some healthcare taxes this year that should help stabilize the cost of insurance. We repealed the health insurance tax as well as the tax on Cadillac insurance plans. That was an important bipartisan step we took. We've also been working on legislation in the House to create a reinsurance pool, which could help make exchange products more affordable here in New Hampshire. And I do support adding a public option to the exchanges. I think that would be good for people who are on the individual market and could shop for additional plans. We also have to recognize that the cost of prescription drugs is a significant driver in the healthcare space. And we've got to make sure that we're negotiating with the drug companies to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. I think that's a common sense idea. We were able to pass it in the House this past year, but it remained stalled in the Senate. So I think we should be looking at costs, both of premiums and also prescription drugs, as a way to make sure that healthcare isn't out of reach for so many folks in our state. We benefit from people having care, and that's why I led the effort in New Hampshire to help pass Medicaid expansion and to implement it. I think that's working for us. Repealing the ACA would go back in the wrong direction, would also get rid of substance use disorder coverage that people rely on. And at a point in time where we're still experiencing an addiction epidemic, we can't afford to see that happen.
New Hampshire, like much of the Northeast, is an aging part of our country. And so our seniors make up a big part of our community. And we had a number of them reach out with questions around Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, which are important programs that they rely on. And there's often discussion during election cycles about reform for those key programs, particularly Social Security, the potential for benefit cuts. Wondering where you fall on securing those programs, what options are or should not be talked about with potentially ensuring they remain solvent, available to those populations that really rely on them.
Yeah. Well, I see Social Security and Medicare as foundational programs. People pay into them throughout their working years, and they should be able to count on them to know that they'll support them in their retirement. And so, for Medicare, one way that we can shore up that program is by having price negotiation on drugs that would lower costs in Medicare and would allow us to shore up the program and make sure that it's solvent for years to come. With respect to Social Security, that's a program that I don't think should be, privatized or means tested. I think when everyone's in the system, we can all find ways to come together and support it. And I think we should look at how do we extend the lifeline of Social Security without jeopardizing the benefits that people rely on. It's as important as it's ever been because people are much less likely to have a pension these days than maybe 30 or 40 years ago. And that's why I think making sure that we're not jeopardizing the future of Social Security is important. Now, a recent move around the payroll tax caused the actuary to say that if that change was made permanent, that could bankrupt Social Security in 3 years. I don't think that's something we should be supporting, and we really should be looking for a bipartisan solution that ensures that the solvency and security of Social Security is paramount.
The time we have left, a few other questions, I think, about leadership, collaboration, bringing people together. We're in a very polarizing election cycle right now, and it seems like the divide between Americans who disagree on politics is greater than ever. I wonder if you have some thoughts on, what's something you would do in your next term as congressman, if elected, to try and bring people together, and whether it's a policy or how you conduct your job. How do we start to bridge the divide that has continued to form over the last few months, few years?
I'm glad you asked that question because that's the only way we're going to overcome our challenges. The only way to get COVID relief passed right now is to do it in a bipartisan way by bringing people together. We were able to do that last spring. Unfortunately, politics is getting in the way of getting something over the finish line right now. And so we need folks that are rooted in their communities who understand that here in New Hampshire, we can come together and solve problems. It's sometimes a lot harder in Washington. The work that I've been doing for our veterans on infrastructure, on the environment, on healthcare has largely been bipartisan. In fact, of the 33 bills that I've written and introduced, a majority of those 17 were introduced with Republican co-sponsors. I always look to find someone to work with across the aisle because, number one, you have a better chance of passing it, and number two, you make the bill better. I've worked for our veterans and chair the subcommittee on oversight with a guy who's a retired general. He chaired the subcommittee last time. And when we're working on issues, whether it's whistleblowers or care for our veterans on that subcommittee, there's no difference between us. And that's really the way it should be on the issues of the day. So I do hope we can find our footing and our sense of common purpose as a nation. It involves understanding who the other person is that you're dealing with, where they come from, and the fact that you have a lot in common. And I think that's what people are looking for. Unfortunately, we see a lot of negative attacks, including in my campaign. I'm going to be focused on how we can actually move the ball forward and get some things done. And I'm always much more focused on what's left to do as opposed to what we've already accomplished. And also very focused on the type of constituent service we can offer people. You know, even in a divided climate where you might not be able to see eye to eye on legislation, if you can help someone in a very personal way, that's what public service should be all about. And that's where my focus is going to be the next 2 years.
So I think we have time to get to one more, and it's a good segue on that last question to talk about kind of your role models of how you approach public service. I wonder if you can share with us, you know, who's an elected official that you have followed throughout your career, throughout politics, and you know, what have they shown you, or what lessons have you learned from them in terms of how to conduct yourself, and what lessons or ideals do they represent that you think are important for public service to get at some of those things that you're touching on in terms of being productive, bringing people together, and forging progress?
Mm-hmm. Well, the person that I think of the most on a day-to-day basis is Governor John Lynch. I mean, I think he just had an amazing interpersonal style. He was very direct with the people of New Hampshire, and he always sought to bring people together. And that's what we need at this moment now more than ever. I think of the disasters where he would show up and hand his cell phone number out to folks. And I always look for ways that we can be as accessible as possible to the constituents of this district, because really that's what it's all about. That's why we've done office hours in all 80 communities of the district. We've worked on behalf of thousands of individuals that have called and had needed help with the federal government on one issue or the next. And why, you know, people know where to find me. They know who I am. And ultimately, I think if we're going to bridge the divide and move this country forward, it's about getting back to basics. It's about getting back to the mutual understanding that we are all truly in this together. And ultimately, if we're going to be able to address our healthcare needs and move our economy forward, there aren't Republican or Democratic solutions necessarily. I mean, really, we should be looking out for our country, for our state, for our communities. And a lot of those issues don't know party lines. And so he's someone who transcends party lines, and I always look to him as sort of a North Star politically in terms of how I conduct myself.
I think that about wraps up our time we have this morning. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Best of luck going forward and with the week or so remaining, and we really appreciate the time you spent here this morning. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate the time, and I hope any of the chamber members out there will reach out to our office if there's anything we can do for you individually.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
So in just a minute, we're going to bring on our next candidate. But as I mentioned earlier, we are so fortunate to have our sponsors assist us with putting on great programs like this. So I'd like to now introduce Nathan Saller from Bellwether Community Credit Union to share a few words on behalf of our presenting sponsor today. Nathan?
On behalf of our 35,000 members and our entire team, Bellwether Community Credit Union is proud to sponsor today's forum. Bellwether Community Credit Union was established in 1921 when a group of 100 individuals pooled their money in an effort to access affordable financial services. 99 years later, Bellwether is still helping members throughout our great state buy their first home, save for the future, or grow their business. Back in 1921, the people of New Hampshire were still recovering from a worldwide flu pandemic. Today, we face a similar challenge from a similar virus, along with the accompanying economic and human toll. We've directly experienced the role state and national governments have on our businesses, communities, and families. And while we still have many challenges ahead, I'm incredibly grateful and thankful to live in the greatest state, in the greatest country in the world, and have the freedom to have a voice in a democratic process that millions around the world envy. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to join us today. A very special thank you to the incredible Chamber staff for putting on today's program. And finally, I'd like to thank each of the candidates for joining us today to share their positions, strategies, and visions for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, and the team at Bellwether Community Credit Union for their support and partnership with the Chamber. As always, we really appreciate it. Before I bring up our next candidate, just a quick reminder and plug that today's live stream is being recorded, and we'll be posting it and sharing it with our Chamber members and the community. If you are interested, please share it with your colleagues, share it with your friends. The whole purpose and mission behind this program is to help connect our members and community with where the candidates stand on important issues. So with that, we're going to dive right next into our next interview. We've got a busy schedule this morning. It's my pleasure to introduce the Republican nominee for Congressional District 1, Matt Mowers.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. So, can we fist bump? Is that
Sure,
allowed
we
right
can
now?
do that.
All right,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
I want to do what's appropriate here.
Matt, thanks for being here.
Yeah, Mike, thank you for having me.
I know it's a busy stretch now that we're 8 days.
8 days away.
8 days to go. So I've got a bunch of questions to get to, and I'm going to try and fit in as many as we can. So let's dive right in.
Sounds great.
COVID-19 pandemic has obviously been one of the most important issues facing the community and the country throughout this election cycle and over the last year. I want to start with the federal response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And from your perspective, what has gone right from the federal response and what has gone wrong? And what do we need to be focused on at the federal level going forward?
Sure. Well, thanks, Mike. And it's impacted all of us, right? I know in the outset, my wife, Cassie, and I were just doing what a lot of folks were trying to do, which is help our neighbors, work with small businesses to, stay going during all the closures and all of that. So really important. I've actually worked on these issues before, though. I was chief of staff to Dr. Deborah Birx, who we all now know is the coronavirus coordinator. But she and I and Dr. Fauci at the time were implementing our global HIV program, which actually was another time when we didn't think we could take on a tackleable pandemic, and yet we were able to do it by bringing American ingenuity and the private sector in. I think we can learn some of the lessons from that and apply it to now. And so when you look at the federal response, we need to continue to invest in ramping up of testing. It was great that just last week it was announced that first responders in New Hampshire actually now have access to rapid testing. We need to make that more readily available for other key areas, including the private sector, because you have some core supply chain areas that need access to rapid testing so we can get people back to work in a way that's healthy and safe. So that's one piece. We need to continue to invest in therapies and therapeutics. And it's really great that the FDA is continuing to focus on this, whether it's by rapidly moving forward approvals for a lot of new therapies, including Regeneron and others. We also need to continue to invest in a safe, effective, reliable vaccine. I think we're going to continue to be looking at a similar circumstance that we are in right now until we have that vaccine. So it's really important that we continue to move there in a safe, but also a speedy process. And then when we're looking at the other areas of the response, we need to reopen the ability for small businesses to get Paycheck Protection Program funding. There's over $100 billion right now that's already been appropriated by Congress that's sitting there unutilized and unavailable for small businesses. The only reason it hasn't reopened for small businesses is politics. I think that's really where Congress has failed us right now. They put other political agendas into play instead of just trying to deliver for hardworking middle-class families and small businesses here in New Hampshire and around our country. They could take a standalone vote on the Paycheck Protection Program right now today if they wanted to. There's something called a discharge petition on the on the floor of the House of Representatives. Any member could sign that on their own free will. Unfortunately, right now, it hasn't been done in a bipartisan way because the Speaker of the House isn't allowing her caucus to sign that. So we could have a vote on that today. We could open up more Paycheck Protection Program funding and could be available to small businesses tomorrow if we wanted to, if Congress was willing to put politics aside and deliver for people. And so I think that's one small piece. We also need to, of course, I'm a close ally of Governor Sununu's. He's a good supporter of my campaign. He needs an ally down in D.C. to continue to fight for relief, both at the state and local level, and then also make sure that we're continuing to put forth good ideas that foster economic growth in a way that we know how to do it here in New Hampshire.
I want to get to the economic recovery in just a minute, but to follow up on the public health side of the response, and really, it seems that in order for us to fully focus on the economic recovery, the virus has to be under control.
Exactly right.
And the spread has to be mitigated. And I'm wondering if, from your perspective, just over the weekend, we obviously heard the unfortunate news that we recorded 2 of the highest infection days thus far in the pandemic. Other parts of the state, other parts of the country, the spread is quite significant. Fortunately, here in the Northeast, we've done a good job and kept the spread fairly slow. But at this, based on your experience and working with some of the principals on the coronavirus task force, do you think it's still possible for us as a country to get our arms around this thing and slow it down so that we can fully focus on the relief efforts to rebuild?
I do. I think by taking some of those steps I laid out, ramping up rapid testing, working with public-private partnerships to make sure that core supply chain areas also have the ability to access that rapid testing. For example, you have a lot of folks who are in the food processing industry. Clearly, we're all going to need to continue that supply chain to stay open. We should develop a public-private partnership with entities like that so they have access to that type of rapid testing. I mean, it's great, actually, right now, the new test that Abbott's put out there, it's about $7 per test, much lower than any other test that's out there. That's something that a lot of industries could afford to use for their workers that allows them to remain open. So I do think we need to continue to take those steps to get ahead of the curve, make sure that we're being smart. I mean, unfortunately, based on the science and the data, we are going to see an uptick in cases. It's getting colder, more folks are inside. You also have the fact that humidity has been shown, based on science, to actually decrease the spread of the virus. Obviously, right now, we don't have a lot of humidity in the atmosphere. Those are all things that are going to contribute to a at least short-term increase from now and likely into the winter months. And that's why we do have to be very smart in how we approach this. Folks should be following public health messages that are out there as well. But I think there's a way we can do that and do it safely while also keeping everyone's health in mind, but also continue to reopen the economy. We can't go back to a shutdown. I mean, we just can't. That's just going to be the wrong direction for all of us. So we have to figure out ways we can do this in a way that protects everyone's health, whether it's opening businesses or getting kids back into a school environment as well.
Switching to the recovery efforts, there is obviously an ongoing negotiations right now between Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin on another relief bill. There's still talk that it could happen before Election Day. I guess, what are your priorities that you would like to see in that relief bill? What are the most important priorities? And if you were in Congress and that bill lands it on the floor before Election Day, do you want to see it on the floor of Election Day? What's your timeline on when that needs to be acted on?
Well, I wanted it kind of done weeks ago, right? I was over in Epping the other day talking to the owner of a restaurant diner called Ryan's Place. It's named after her son who died in active duty. And, for her, this isn't just a business. It's a legacy to him. And so she came to me with a tear in her eye and she said, I can't access more funding from the Paycheck Protection Program today, which can then help me keep this business open, which, again, isn't for her, it's not about the money. She doesn't care about the money. Most small business owners, that's secondary. What really matters is their investment in what they're doing. It's because they believe in what they're doing every day. Unfortunately, those small business owners are being left behind because Congress continues to play games. And so when we talk about priorities, all priorities I think we should have gotten done weeks ago, if not months ago, is expanding access to the Paycheck Protection Program funding, making sure then that, especially, by the way, for businesses that have been disproportionately affected, restaurant, hospitality, some seasonal businesses, they're the ones who are really bearing the brunt of some of the economic downturn as a result of COVID-19. We should also then be expanding to make sure that resources are available for state and local governments for expenditures that they've accrued, like we've had in other national, when we've had disaster declarations in the past as well. Similar to this, that should be readily available. I also want to make sure that school districts are getting funding for PPE. It's a big conversation going on right now. I think that we should be reimbursing school districts for PPE. That's going to be the way they can ensure that they continue to get kids back into a school environment, but do it in a way that's healthy and safe for the children, the teachers, and obviously everyone else who works in the school district as well.
I want to switch to a few other topics, but just real quickly before we leave that. There's, obviously some discussion about if a relief bill passes the House, which I know you're running for and can't comment on necessarily what would happen in the Senate.
Sure.
But do you think there's bipartisan votes in the Senate to pass a relief bill if it does get out of the House?
I do. I think if they focus this in a way that actually helps the businesses and the entities that need it. Here's my biggest complaint about the way Congress has approached this entire situation for the past 7 months, is that it's all been about agendas. Right? I mean, if you go back, something called the HEROES Act, it was a $3 trillion bill that had all sorts of unrelated spending. Right? You had funding that was billions of dollars for the release of violent felons from prison at a time when our prison system said they had the resources to handle spacing out prisoners that were needed. You had billions of dollars for folks who didn't pay into any sort of system. So instead you saw Green New Deal emission standards that were being put into the bill. Look, those are all fine conversations to have, but when you've got businesses that are shutting down, when you've got people being laid off, when you've got middle-class families in need of relief, put the politics aside. There's going to be plenty of time to have a conversation about all those other important topics, but get the relief to the people who need it. And so I think if Congress, led by Nancy Pelosi, was actually willing to pass a bill that did that, I think you'd see the Senate be willing to do it. I think there's enough bipartisan support for those core areas that you could have relief for the people who need it and small businesses that need it today. And we could get it done before Election Day.
So switching to some other important topics to the Chamber and to the business community, transportation and infrastructure is a top strategic goal and priority of ours. It's the backbone of economic development. In particular, issues like passenger rail and support for Manchester-Boston Regional Airport are key economic drivers. So I'm wondering, if elected, what are your priorities on the transportation infrastructure front? What policies or bills would you support to see that CD1 is getting the funding and resources it needs to advance those key transportation infrastructure priorities?
Well, look, I'd want to work hand in hand with Governor Sununu on his 10-year transportation plan as well. I mean, there are certain priorities that have some level of federal funding, but I think we could get more. You probably have the exit in Londonderry 4A off of 93, which is a key area that we need, especially as we're continuing to support. I think you are going to see some support for the airline industry from any sort of new COVID-19 relief package. If that's done, I think you're going to see an uptick in the expansion of services out of the Manchester airport again, which is important, right? I mean, that is a key hub of our economy right now. And it's really important that we continue to expand flight patterns from Manchester, because right now they have cut back because of a cutback in travel. I'm hopeful that, especially by the spring, you're going to see an uptick in travel again, and we need to make sure that we have Manchester Regional Airport supported so that's ready for that. That's a key thing. Working with Governor Sununu, like I said, on his 10-year transportation plan, and then working to support additional measures that are needed for that, making sure we're fighting for federal funding. In a way also, by the way, that approaches a new way to go about it. I mean, right now, the regulations in place to make a project shovel-ready is onerous, it's cumbersome, and it doesn't even make sense, right? It looks like it was designed on a whiteboard in some windowless conference room in D.C. by folks who have never actually held a shovel in their hands. We really need to have a lot more public input into these processes. We need to streamline them. And also, there's a lot of interest right now from the private sector in co-investing in some of these programs as well. That's something else we can do if we have people with kind of a forward-looking insight into all of this in order to bring these projects about.
Workforce development is a key topic for economic growth. It's, again, one of our top strategic priorities. Prior to the onset of the pandemic, it was probably the number one issue I heard from businesses in terms of a barrier for potential growth is finding and retaining and attracting talent. I suspect it's going to continue to be a challenge as we come out of this pandemic. If in Congress, what are a couple of examples of policies that you would advance to help a state like New Hampshire attract and retain young people?
Well, so there's two different things. One very specific for a sector, and then I think one that's a little broader. First and foremost, I think we have a unique opportunity because of COVID-19 and what we've learned to bring a lot of manufacturing from China here to the United States, especially in some core areas, pharmaceutical manufacturing development, PPE production, of course. Also, I think some key national security components that we rely on manufactured parts from China can be made here in the United States. I've had conversations with a lot of these folks who run these companies who are interested in bringing that manufacturing here to New England and potentially to New Hampshire. In fact, we've already been working with some of those companies to get them here to New Hampshire. I think that could be spur a whole new sector of growth for our region. That would be good, high-tech, high-paying jobs. That would be good for a lot of new college graduates. That would attract a lot of young workers and improve the workforce here so that they have economic opportunities when they do graduate from school. So that's one piece. I think the other piece we need to do is work hand in hand with our higher education institutions so that they're providing additional development of programs that tie in with the sectors of the economy that we have here in New Hampshire. I think one of that will be biotech development. If we can work in partnership with them, I've talked to the folks who run the Pease International Trade Port, as well as other folks who run a lot of other areas in different companies in New Hampshire. If they had that partnership with whether it's University of New Hampshire, whether it's Southern New Hampshire University, there's so many different opportunities that are working in partnership between higher education and the private sector that I think we can have a pipeline from schooling to economic opportunities that will keep a lot of young people here in New Hampshire. And that's so important. And we are seeing a lot of that happen right now in downtown Manchester. because of the redevelopment of the mills, so many job opportunities now exist that 10 years ago, none of us could have even dreamed of, really.
Switching gears to healthcare.
Yeah.
Whether you're a family, a resident, employer, certainty around healthcare is important. And for businesses, understanding what healthcare costs are going to impact their ability to operate and hire and retain workers is incredibly important. And we've been kind of stuck in limbo for the past few years where you have a very polarized debate around healthcare, whether it's building on ACA or repeal and replace with something else. I want to know, where do you fall on that?
Sure.
If you're in Congress, what are you going to be advocating for to reform and bring some certainty to the healthcare debate so that both families, workers, and businesses can know what we should be planning for?
Yeah, well, it's a hugely important issue, in large part because passage of the ACA has led to some of the largest premium increases we've ever seen. I was talking to a woman just the other day from Greenland who, for the first time in her life, was unemployed, and so she started her own sole proprietorship. She went out shopping to find a new healthcare plan. The best healthcare plan she could find was a $500 a month high deductible plan. That 6 years ago would have cost half that much. We need to be looking for a replacement if Obamacare is repealed. I do think Obamacare has not led to the outcomes that those who voted for it desired. It has led to higher premium increases. It has led to a lot of folks losing their health care plans, especially in a state like New Hampshire, which has a relatively limited number of insurers. What we need to be doing, though, in that replacement is by individualizing healthcare, making it easier for small businesses to afford healthcare. Now, I came back from a late day on the campaign trail a couple weeks ago, stopped off at T-Bone's about a couple miles down the road from my house, sitting at the bar having a bite to eat, restaurant's closing up, I go to pay. A couple young people walk by me. It's 10 o'clock at night, but they said, "Do you mind if we ask you a question?" And they were small business owners. One of them owned an Apple iPhone repair business. Mm-hmm. They said the biggest challenge we have is keeping employees because we lose them to bigger companies because we just can't afford to provide the health care and health insurance that they can get elsewhere. It's one of the reasons I support giving tax incentives to small businesses so that they can either give a direct healthcare credit or provide a larger and more comprehensive healthcare plan to their employees. It's the reason why I support increasing tax deductibility of health savings accounts, so individuals, tax-free, invest more in their own healthcare outcomes, whether it's for routine healthcare costs or for catastrophic instances. It has to be easier for small businesses to pool their resources for association and community healthcare plans. Those are ways that will also drive down costs. And all of that can be done at a time while we drive down the overall cost of healthcare. We need price transparency. We need to end surprise medical billing. And there's a whole host of other things we can do that actually drives down the cost of healthcare, which will ultimately drive down insurance costs as well.
So we have a few minutes left. I want to try and fit in a few more questions quickly. New Hampshire is an aging part of our country, an aging population. So Social Security is a key issue. I had a number of folks write in interested in that. Are there what policies or are there any things that you support or oppose related to ensuring Social Security remains solvent and available for the population that relies on it?
I've also gotten a lot of feedback and folks who ran us about Social Security. Most notably was my dad. My dad recently went on Social Security a few years ago. He wants to make sure that it's protected for folks like him who've really been planning to have Social Security as a piece of their retirement, especially after working their whole career paying into it. So we do need to protect Social Security for those who are on it, and certainly those who are nearing it, in the way that they intended it to be. It's not fair to ask folks to pay into something their entire career, then change it at the last hour. I just don't think that's right. Mm-hmm. We can have a conversation for younger employees, though. I'm 31. Chances are pretty good that Social Security may have to look a little different when I retire than for folks who are 40 years old plus. So I think we should have that conversation what that looks like. I think there are some changes that can be made that actually extend the lifeline of Social Security without having to increase the payroll tax or without having to change the actual defined benefit side on the way out as well.
All right, so a couple of final questions as we wrap up here, just more personal about leadership, collaboration. We'll start with role models. And is there a role model from politics that you have followed throughout your career that inspires you in terms of how you would want to conduct yourself if elected? And what are the main lessons that you've learned from them that you think are important for someone serving to keep in mind?
Sure. Living or one that's passed?
Either.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever you'd like.
Well, if looking for living role models, I'd really say Governor Sununu. I think his leadership he's shown throughout this pandemic shows why we need leaders like that, who are willing to bring people together, follow the data, and make decisions on the best interests of the people they serve every day. I think he's done a tremendous job for the people of New Hampshire. He's been able to both balance the health implications with the need to get our economy going. The fact that we can provide the resources necessary to help people while also making sure that we keep New Hampshire the special place it is by keeping no income tax, no sales tax, keeping an overall tax climate that allows our economy to reopen. So he's really a role model, not just for myself, but I think for so many who are entering public service. And if we had to look a little bit further in history, I'd say Teddy Roosevelt. Just the fact that his appreciation for the outdoors, my wife and I love hiking on the weekends, his willingness to take on his own party leadership, something I'm willing to do, and just his overall belief that you have to serve the people every day and not just some corporate special interest and not just some DC special interest and not just your party leadership. We need more people willing to speak truth to power, and I think he's been a great role model for that.
Last question. We have less than a minute left.
Sure.
So in this very polarizing election cycle that we find ourselves in, Americans seem to be more divided than ever when they don't agree on politics. And I'm just wondering, if elected, what's something you can do, policy you would pursue, or how you would conduct yourself that you think would help contribute to bringing people together?
Sure, and it's so important. It's something I've done. When I was in the State Department, when I was helping lead our global health office, we actually had to get our global HIV/AIDS program reauthorized. A lot of folks said, don't bother, just let it get funded. Don't worry about the authorization. We just didn't think that was the right way to run a program. So we brought a liberal Democrat and a conservative Republican together, and we got it done, and we did it unanimously 3 days before Congress adjourned, because we believed in the goodness of the program. We brought people together to be able to see the best of it. So whether it's issues like that, whether it's working in a bipartisan way with our own delegation here to tackle our drug addiction challenges, whether it's working with a bipartisan delegation in New England to protect the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, there's a lot of things we can do if we work together, as long as we put our both best interests forward. Doesn't mean we agree all the time. That's not how our system is set up, right? There's going to be times when it's a little disagreeable. But it doesn't mean that we can't get things done on behalf of the people we serve every day. And that's why I'm looking to go down to Washington, D.C. and get done. Plus, I have a track record of getting that done.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. I know it's, again, a very busy time, and you have lots of work to do over the next week or so. Best of luck to you going forward, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate you having me.
Great. All right, we're going to transition to a 10-minute intermission before we shift to our candidates for governor. Thank you all for joining us. Please stick around. And again, we'll be back in about 10 minutes with our candidates for governor. Thanks so much, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Greater Manchester Chamber Congressional and Gubernatorial Forum. I really appreciate everyone tuning in today and for your participation. We're going to move into our next segment for the candidates for governor. Just a few reminders of our format. We've got 20-minute moderated interviews with each candidate with a variety of questions on topics important to chamber members and that were submitted by chamber members. We're going to be topics like COVID-19, economic development, workforce development, healthcare, and more. And we're really excited to be able to have this opportunity. As a reminder, this live stream is being recorded and will be shared and posted on our social media. We encourage you to forward it on to friends and colleagues. The mission behind events like these is to connect you with where our candidates stand on important issues. So with that, let's move to our next candidate. It's my pleasure to introduce the Democratic nominee for governor, Senator Dan Feltes. Thanks, Senator.
Yeah. Do we elbow bump?
You can do it.
Okay. There we go.
Thanks for being here, Senator.
You got it. You got it.
Really
Thank you for having
appreciate
me.
you taking the time. I know it's a busy just over a week to go, so there's a lot going on, but I really appreciate you taking the time. I've got a bunch of questions to dive into, so we're going to try and get through as many as we can.
That's great.
The first, obviously, COVID-19 has been the most important issue that all of us are dealing with in some form or fashion. And I want to start and focus in on the state's response to COVID-19. Obviously, if elected as governor, this would be an issue squarely on your plate day one. How would you rate the state's response to COVID-19 thus far? What do you think has gone right, and what do you think has gone wrong, and what would you fix if elected?
Well, I'm of that fundamental belief that we are all in this together. We need to look out for community members, look out for our schools, look out for our business leaders and our small businesses on Main Street. On schools, the current governor did not do a reopening plan. No public health standards to help our communities and our schools, kind of left them on their own. And I think that has led to a degree of chaos at the local level. You know, folks who sign up for school board, they're not epidemiologists. They're signing up in good faith to serve the public, and they needed support in public health standards. And they didn't get that under this current administration. So that's number one. Number two is we need to make sure that the relief money gets out into the community, to our small businesses on Main Street. You know, early on in the process, Senator D'Alessandro and I wrote and encouraged the current governor to prioritize small businesses on Main Street, including restaurants and hospitality, who's getting particularly hit by COVID. And they need a bridge to get through this winter to the spring. They weren't prioritized. You know, just a different perspective in how to move forward. And so also we need things like paid family and medical leave insurance to make sure that we help out our business community, help out working families. We had bipartisan legislation, Mike, on this. 3 pieces of bipartisan paid family and medical leave insurance legislation. All 3 were blocked by the current governor. But that would help people right now and small businesses who want to retain those workers. If those workers, you know, they're trained, they need to take time for a family member, either dealing with opioid addiction or cancer or have a new baby, or dealing with COVID. And so we put together a comprehensive bipartisan legislation on paid family and medical leave insurance that would have really helped right now in COVID. Unfortunately, the current administration, the current governor, blocked 3 bipartisan pieces of legislation.
Paid family leave is a topic I want to get to in a little bit, along with a few other policy areas. Sticking with COVID for a moment, one of the more, I would say, difficult decisions a governor would have to make under these circumstances is when to issue a stay-at-home order, when to potentially restrict certain businesses. You know, fortunately, we seem to have slowed the spread here in the Northeast, and you know, there's certainly some risk going forward. Other parts of the country are not doing so well, and that's a concern of what the future might hold for us. So I'm wondering, you know, if elected, how are you going to approach that part of the public health situation of what levers would you pull or be considering in terms of slowing a future spread of COVID-19?
We got to listen to the medical experts, Mike, and the science. Medical experts right now recommend masks, common sense public mask requirement. We're the only state in New England without it. Our business leaders and business owners by and large, the ones I've talked to want it because they don't want to, on their own, be telling people to do this. And that puts them at potentially an uncomfortable disadvantage vis-a-vis other businesses. And we know it works. So I'm going to listen to the medical experts. We're going to do what makes sense. We're going to listen to business leaders. We're going to listen to people on the ground and work with them in a collaborative way. And we're going to work with the city of Manchester. Look, under the current administration, with the current governor, that hasn't quite frankly happened on a whole host of issues, from housing and homelessness to addiction treatment services. And unfortunately, what we saw, including in 2019, August 31st, 2019, the current governor coming down to Manchester unannounced and basically attacking Manchester for not having, in his view, a plan on opioid addiction treatment. They do have a plan. What they need is not an adversary in the corner office. They need a partner to work on housing, homelessness, and addiction treatment services, all of which have been exacerbated, Mike, under COVID. It's all inextricably interlinked. And so we need to work together. We have a housing plan that we've released. We have a healthcare plan that we've released. Replaces the so-called Doorways program with the Doorways to Recovery to make sure that people who need the help get the help at the time that they need it. And it's a statewide plan. In addition, we've created or will create an office of the governor in the city of Manchester to repair that relationship. I'm honored to be supported in this race by Mayor Joyce Craig, and I will partner with the mayor, I'll partner with community members here in Manchester and business leaders here in Manchester to move Manchester and New Hampshire forward.
So last question on COVID-19 before we move to other topics, important policy topics, but there's a lot of focus right now on another relief package at the federal level.
Right.
And I'm wondering what message you would be sending to our delegation as governor, or conversations you've had with our current delegation that you think are critically important to be in that next relief package.
So the conversations I've had center on making sure that you prioritize the problems on the ground over the politics in Washington, D.C. And Senator Hassan, Senator Shaheen, and Congressman Pappas and Custer did a great job of getting the PPP to our small businesses here in the state of New Hampshire, getting the $1.25 billion in relief to the state of New Hampshire. They got that to the state of New Hampshire. The current governor took unilateral control over the $1.25 billion, and in my view, didn't disperse it in the way that I thought made sense. Didn't prioritize actual small businesses, and didn't prioritize our restaurant and hospitality and our hospitals and our healthcare system. And we're seeing what's happening with our hospitals right now, including Lakes Region General Hospital filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. You got a clinic out in Charlestown that went under. Most of these services, Mike, are in the red, and including in hospitals in Manchester are suffering. So we got to help stabilize our healthcare system. So my message is stabilize the healthcare system, make sure that we look out for our state and local budgets so we don't increase property taxes right now. The budgets are suffering. As a consequence, we got to make sure that we take care of that. And I know that the current governor, along with Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, don't supporting our state and local budgets as part of a relief package. I think that's critical to moving forward. It's critical to protect property taxpayers in Manchester and beyond.
So that's a good segue to the next question I want to ask, which was about the state budget. And, if elected, crafting and submitting a state budget will be square on your radar and something you have to do with the COVID-19 impact as part of that calculation. And if federal support has not been delivered at that point or is still up in the air, what levers would you look to pull here in terms of either increasing taxes or cutting different programs in order to submit a balanced budget?
Well, first, a few things. The budget is a reflection of our values. And I think we got to protect property taxpayers here in the state of New Hampshire, protect our communities in the state of New Hampshire, advance education. We secured the biggest public school education budget in state history, $140 million in new education spending. The current governor vetoed, but ultimately accepted it. And that helped Manchester, that helped Derry, that helped surrounding communities in a significant way. We got to protect that budget and build off of it. we need to continue to supply the support to our communities. So there's a number of different things to do. One is to continue down the pathway of business tax reform, which I think you're familiar with, Mike, where we lessened, generally speaking, the burden on businesses physically located in New Hampshire, and then closed the loopholes for multi-state, multinational corporations that were selling products or services into the state of New Hampshire. So they pay more of their fair share, while businesses physically located in New Hampshire get a little relief. That kind of business tax reform, I think, makes good sense. Continue down that pathway to support our businesses here in New Hampshire, support property taxpayers here in New Hampshire, and to make sure that we look out for working people and working families. And Mike, I come from a working family, working class family. My dad worked in a furniture factory for 45 years, same one, on air conditioned, doing the same job, day in and day out. My mom, she did part-time work, including the night shift, while raising 4 kids. And right out of law school, I served as a legal aid attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, fighting for workers and working families, managing the Housing Justice Project of New Hampshire Legal Assistance, working on workforce affordable housing, and in the state Senate for 3 terms and as majority leader of the state Senate, building budgets that work for working people and working families. We need to build off of that and look out for them. And just one more thing on this. During the last economic crisis, the Great Recession, I was serving as the manager of the Housing Justice Project at New Hampshire Legal Assistance, managing the casework, battling Wall Street banks who were foreclosing on business owners and residents all across New Hampshire, helping people out. But what I saw during that crisis under a different legislature, Bill O'Brien, was dramatically scaling back the support for our communities and the support for our business community and workers and families. And I saw what happened on the ground. At a time when people needed the help the most, they got the help the least. So on day one, we need to manage this budget to make sure that we look out for people that are suffering right now. And that's what I'll do. I saw the impact on the ground during that crisis and this economic and public health crisis. Those folks who are falling through the cracks need some help. We need to protect property taxpayers. We need to move forward and move forward together.
I want to ask about the minimum wage. That's a clear disagreement between you and the governor. I plan to ask him about it too. Right. It's obviously an issue that the business community is interested in, has views on. You've supported a minimum wage increase, and I'm wondering, make the case for why you believe that's the right thing to do, and talk about how you think that the impact that might have on smaller businesses who are concerned that a minimum wage increase might force them to reduce their workforce or make other cuts to their business.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I think what we've seen around the country and in different communities, if there's a gradual increase to it, not just jump right away, that the impact is lessened. And so that's what I support, a common sense approach to raising it. And in fact, from small business leaders and small business owners that I've talked to, generally support that. I say, Dan, I support increasing it, but just don't jump right away to 12 or 15, do it gradual. So that's the approach I support. And I think as a general proposition, no one should have to work full-time and live in poverty, which is what's happening in New Hampshire. And in fact, we have a new definition of essential and frontline worker. And a lot of folks in grocery stores are essential workers. A lot of folks, janitors and other working folks are essential workers, and they need to be treated with respect and dignity and not be working hard and living in poverty. So it's a pretty basic baseline proposition. The other thing, too, is more money in people's pocket means more money in the local economy. It's not, if you're a low to middle income worker, you're not really, unfortunately, saving a lot. You're spending that money, generally speaking, in the local economy, which helps business activity in the local economy. And now, obviously, as you mentioned, the current governor and I have a difference of opinion on this. I support a gradual common sense increase. He does not support even reinstating New Hampshire's minimum wage. And in fact, when he vetoed 2 minimum wage bills, he actually took a pay raise for himself as governor of $31,000 while vetoing the minimum wage. I don't think that's right. I think that sends a wrong message. And I've said I will reject those pay raises that he took, that the current governor took, and I will return that to the state treasury. And unless and until we reestablish and raise the minimum wage for our workers and our families.
Workforce development is a huge topic for the business community. It's a priority for our chamber. There's lots of different elements to workforce development in terms of how we can attract and retain workers. So there's a lot we could get into there, but I'd like to ask specifically about housing because it's something you mentioned. I know the governor has talked about it a lot. We hear it quite a bit acutely from young people and young families. And it's becoming a crisis where if we are not producing a balanced amount of housing options, we're going to restrict our ability to be able to grow. So if elected, what specific policies would you pursue to help us address this issue to support our workforce?
It's a competitiveness issue, absolutely. You just hit the nail on the head, Mike. And when the vacancy rate nationwide is roughly 5% in rental housing, in New Hampshire it's about 1.4%. In most communities, it's on the I-93 corridor, it's actually 0%, which means you can't find a place to live, and if you do, no pun intended, the prices are through the roof. It's a workforce issue. We've made some strides in the last budget. As Chair of Ways and Means, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee, Majority Leader, we put together a budget that we dedicated the first $5 million in real estate transfer tax revenue to the Workforce Housing Affordable Housing Fund. For the first time in New Hampshire history, a dedicated allotment, similar to what surrounding states do, says New Hampshire is open for business for workforce affordable housing to increase supply. And that leverages private and federal dollars to the tune of 7 to 12, depending on the project. The current governor didn't like that idea, but we put it in the budget and we kept it in. We got to protect it and build off of it. That's part of my housing plan that we put forward. Another part of it is to make sure that we deal with some of the practices at the local level that are fairly unreasonable, unreasonable, impact fees or density limitations. But we also need to expand access to families as well. That will loosen up the market in a way that makes sense, including doing for the first time ever state-based Section 8 vouchers to families that need it, and provide an incentive to landlords on their business profits tax to take Section 8 vouchers. That we know these are just good common sense steps to move forward in our housing market. And as someone who led the Housing Justice Project at New Hampshire Legal Assistance and worked on these issues, and in the state Senate for 3 terms, made bipartisan progress, including on accessory dwelling units, as you may remember, making sure that folks have an opportunity to use in-law apartments and use the available and existing housing stock to further workforce and affordable housing. We got that done. We've made some progress, but this has only gotten worse in COVID. No doubt about it. And as some housing advocates say, housing is where jobs go to sleep at night. We need the housing. We need the supply. So if you want to folks want to take a look at our housing plan online, danfeltesnh.com, we have our housing plan up. As far as we can tell, it's the first campaign for governor that put forward a housing plan. And so, we need to move forward on it. It is a workforce development issue. Part of it, too, Mike, is we set aside about $1 million of the increased allotment to the Workforce Housing Fund to develop workforce housing along the I-93 commuter rail corridor. I'm a big proponent of commuter rail. That is another distinction between me and the current governor. We need to move forward on commuter rail up I-93 and make sure that we use it as an opportunity to do workforce housing along the corridor. That just makes good sense. Other jurisdictions that have done this have pursued that too. And so that could facilitate the kind of public-private partnerships that we need to move forward on workforce development and economic growth.
Last couple questions while we still have time. In terms of issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, as you noted, homelessness is certainly one of them. And we feel that here in Manchester for sure. And I'm wondering what you see the state's role in addressing this issue is in our cities across the state, which tend to act as the safety net for all of our communities.
Yeah, the state needs to step up, Mike. And under the current governor, that hasn't happened. And in fact, recently the current governor rejected an application from the city of Manchester to renew the homelessness outreach and coordination function, to reach out and to work with the homeless population, which I've worked with as a legal aid lawyer and also in the state Senate. So there hasn't been a partnership from the state on this. The state, under the current governor, has left the city of Manchester on its own and left all of our communities on its own. And in fact, the homeless camps around the courthouse, that's state property. Nothing has been done. And I've toured the homeless encampments with Chief Goonan down along the river and talked with folks down there. And look, what they need is leadership. What they need is a true partner on housing in the corner office. And like I said, rejecting this grant, the current governor rejecting this grant, and also coming down to Manchester on August 31st, 2019, and actually attacking Manchester, that's not what folks want or need. We need leadership, we need partnership, working together in a collaborative way. You're not going to get everything right, but you got to give it a shot. And that's what I'll do as governor. And I think there's so much opportunity to work together. Again, I'm honored to have the support of Mayor Craig in this race for governor, and the support of a lot of folks on our front lines, including our state troopers and state police, including a bunch of labor unions and folks working in the trenches to help on these issues.
So we have to wrap up shortly, but I want to hit you with one last question that is a little bit more about leadership style and collaboration. We're obviously in a very polarizing time in our country in terms of politics, and it seems like when people disagree, we're further apart than ever before. How would you approach the job of governor in a way that you think would bring people together and move past some of that partisan disagreements?
Well, thanks. I think this is absolutely critical. Look, I just talked about the absence of the current governor not just partnering with our communities, but actually attacking them. But at the State House, it's the same thing. Look, we passed 79 pieces of legislation in the legislature, 65 of which had bipartisan support. 24 of which, Mike, had unanimous bipartisan support. And I'll just give you two quick examples. One is net metering, which would help town of Derry, help Manchester, help surrounding communities in terms of setting up solar facilities on landfills, reducing costs. That net metering legislation was bipartisan. There were 3 bipartisan net metering legislation. And as I said with the current governor in debate the other night, is that the failure to move forward on a lot of this stuff, it's not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue. It's an issue with the current governor. It literally is. And so, and I can tell you the night that I decided to run was the night that we had a veto override vote on addiction treatment services. We had passed that 24-0 in the state Senate. People came together, majority leader, everybody came together, Democrats and Republicans, to help with addiction treatment services, including help with housing in Manchester. That was part of the bill. It was Senate Bill 5 in 2019. We passed it 24-0 in the Senate, passed it out of the House, big vote. Current governor vetoed it. We scheduled the veto override right away because these were needed services to get out to Manchester and our communities. And the current governor went into their caucus, and this is public now, and said, your vote on veto override, it's not about the issues or your constituents, it's about me and protecting my veto. Literally. And all that hard work that we had put into that, folks flipped their votes. I went home and talked to my wife, Erin, and I'm an upbeat guy, but I was not that night. And she said, well, what are you going to do about it? There's only one thing you can do about it, is run. If we're going to move forward, on everything we care about, we got to win, literally. And that's why I decided to run that night, literally. So we need to work together. There's nothing, people do that at the State House. You've seen it. People do it. The obstacle is the current governor.
Senator, we're out of time, unfortunately, but I really appreciate you stopping in and sharing your perspective on these important issues. I know it's a busy time right now, but thanks so much. Best of luck the rest of the way. And
you got it. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, we're going to take a quick 5-minute intermission, and then we're going to wrap up with our final candidate interview with Governor Sununu. So hang on for just a couple minutes while we have an intermission and get our next candidate interview set up, and we'll be wrapping up with Governor Sununu in just a few minutes. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Greater Manchester Chamber Gubernatorial and Congressional Forum. We're on to our last candidate interview, who I'll just bring up in just a moment. But a few quick recognitions and reminders. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, Bellwether Community Credit Union, our advocate sponsor, Eversource, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. A huge shout out and thank you to our AV partner, Events United and Studio Lab, who has helped us put on these great virtual programmings. I want to thank all of our candidates as well for their time today. A reminder that this program is being recorded and will be posted on our social media. Please share it with your friends and colleagues as a way to help let them know where the candidates stand on important issues. So with that, it is my honor to introduce our final candidate today, Republican nominee for governor, Governor Chris Sununu. Governor, thanks for being here.
How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
I like this with the entry music and the whole thing. Good to see you.
It's a good variety show vibe we've got going on.
It's great.
So, well, thanks for being here. I know this is a exceptionally busy time on the campaign trail. Of course, also with your job as governor. So we really appreciate you taking the opportunity.
That's kind of taking priority.
I'm sure. And that's what I want to dive into first is the COVID-19 pandemic, and the state's response to that has obviously been what you've been working on every day for the past several months. And just starting kind of overall with the state's response to the pandemic, now that we're 6-7 months into it, however long it's been, what do you see that has gone right, that you're happy with? Where do you see you would like, we could have done better, or something you would have changed? And what's the priority going forward in terms of the state's response to COVID-19?
I will do my best. If you've seen my press conferences, I can go on all day. So I think the state's responded amazingly well. And by that, I mean the citizens, not just the team in Concord. I think folks know between Dr. Chan and Lori Chivonette, myself, the men and women of the National Guard, all the different folks that really came into play. We were able to create a playbook, because there was no playbook for any of this, figure out what to do, what the needs were, create metrics and accountability, and move forward very transparently. And that's been, I think, one of our biggest success points. We are far from taking a victory lap here, but there's no doubt our COVID numbers are still some of the lowest in the country. Our economy is one of the strongest in the country. We take the COVID pandemic very seriously, and I think we've kept that very elevated message. So one of the best things I'm most happy about is the response of the citizens, understanding that they wear their masks, they maintain their social distancing. We have to make some sacrifices, but if we do that at the right time and the right pace, we can also create flexibility for ourselves. And the citizens are what I think have dictated the success that allows us to keep building. Now, as we go forward, back in May, we were predicting numbers would go up, and they are. They're not going up as fast here as they are in the rest of the country. We still only have a 1% positivity rate. That's great. Very, very, very low hospitalizations and fatalities. That's great. But we are in this for the long haul, and that is 2 months from now, you're going to look at maybe a vaccine just starting to hit the market. Over the winter and into the early spring, it gets more and more prevalent. We get more of it, more folks maybe will start taking it. So I'm not sure where this goes exactly, other than to say we got a long way to go. And I think the hope is that by spring of next year, we're really coming back to what normal is, and normal will be very different. But we've had a lot of success. And while other states are digging out and letting the dust settle, I think we're coming out of this like a rocket in a very positive way, with some new guidelines and maybe some new stipulations, but with a strong economy, safe communities, lots of jobs, and a strong economy is what gives government really the opportunity to do what it needs to do in terms of cutting taxes and all that kind of stuff. So, where we've been a bit disappointed might be, working with the federal administration has had some great points and a lot of failures as well. FEMA especially, I've been pretty hard on. Didn't really come through with some of the testing and the PPE that we were told was going to come at the quality and level that we expected it. So I went out, created my own pathway. We've become one of the best states at buying PPE, especially overseas, bringing it in and making sure our citizens had what they needed. So just being able to kind of say, well, Washington isn't necessarily always going to deliver for us. I mean, Congress has been a very big disaster, I think, given that they haven't done anything since March. I mean, literally since March, Senate and Congress hasn't passed a single bill to help COVID, to innovate, to design some sort of solution. So a lot of expectations were set. They didn't really come through. States as individuals, I think, had to come through and kind of create our own path. And we did very well here, to be sure. So I guess the message is you got to manage. You got to have a management experience. Can't rely on other folks to come through during times of crisis. If they do, that's great. But you can't always rely on it. But the citizens here, the businesses, and the partners we've been able to build have been an awesome success for the state. Long way to go, but we're doing well.
I want to ask about the congressional relief packages that are being discussed right now. But just on the public health side of the equation, if there was something what are you counting on or would like to see the federal government do that could really aid our efforts to keep the public health situation stable and controlled here in the Northeast?
Yeah. Well, look, to be blunt, right, if Congress does something, that would be a sign of life. So whether it's a relief package, whether it's stimulus, I think at this point, we're looking more towards stimulus, right? We've been able to provide the testing. We have lots of testing capacity. We have lots of PPE. We're building up a storage of that sort of thing. So if we see any big spikes or surges, we can manage. But right now, I mean, our economy, we're down to 3.8% unemployment. I mean, we've been gangbusters in terms of the opportunities we've created for our economy. We still have some of the highest wages, lowest poverty rate in the country. All these great metrics are still there for us. So we want to be able to stimulate the economy in terms of infrastructure growth. I think we're looking at roads and bridges and clean drinking water, more fiber. We were one of the only states to use our CARES Act money to increase fiber and high-speed connection for remote workers and schools. About 5,000 different homes got opportunities there. Almost no other state was able to do that. But we will want to build on that, right, and build on those successes. So hopefully, and I think there will be some type of stimulus package, but where Congress really failed was saying, okay, here's $500 billion. Let's take the first step. Our own congressional delegation said, no, it's not enough. Well, it's more than zero, and that's what we got today. So let's take steps. Let's take the wins when we can get them instead of waiting for the perfect bill and getting everything we want, which never happens. It never happens. I never get everything I want as governor, and the legislature never gets everything they want, but we always try to find a way to compromise in the middle. That's where Congress has really fallen down. And so whatever they do, it has to be something. I hope it comes with state flexibility, right? Because what New York might need is very different than what New Hampshire or Boston or California might need, right? And so the flexibility for the states to invest those dollars as they see fit, building around the socioeconomic dynamics of their economy, their pandemic data. Everyone's a little bit different, and we want to build around what our situation is as opposed to having a one-size-fits-all from Washington.
State budget is part of this discussion in terms of what's going to be on your plate if reelected come the next legislative session, and also COVID-19's impact on the ability for us to have a balanced budget. Yeah. So I want to ask both, what levers would you be looking to pull to accomplish that, sure, given all of these factors? And then with the relief package, is that a priority that you think is important, is that Congress looks at delivering aid that states like New Hampshire could use to help make that equation work?
So as everyone knows, you cannot use our current CARES Act dollars to fix the state budget. That's not allowed. No states are allowed to do that. That's been very clear. I know other folks on the other side of the aisle keep saying so. It's just not. I wish it was. But it's not. We had over $500 million problem about 6 months ago. We managed. We created opportunities. We created efficiencies in government. We created opportunities for businesses. That's down to somewhere between $150 and a $200 million issue right now, which compared to the billions and billions that our friends to the south in Massachusetts have. My point in saying all that is other states are going to need massive amounts of revenue replacement, city, state, town level. We don't necessarily need that here. It would be nice if we got a little help, great, but even if we don't, as we started the conversation, I've learned not to bank on Washington for anything. So even if it doesn't come, we have ways we can manage. We can find the efficiencies. We don't need to do mass cuts of programs. We've managed our economy and our situation so well so far. We're on a very positive track. So even if nothing were to change, we have to manage a couple $100 million. I think we're on a much better track. Do you know in October, our revenues surpassed our original budget and plan? So if we stayed on a track like that, I'm not counting on it, but if we stayed on a track like that, we could be in a very, very good position. And again, it's just about finding efficiencies, managing well. We've done a great job. Last year, we did a great job as the pandemic hit. We had to kind of look at the programs, find if it didn't cut any programs. I can't cut a program without the legislature, and they all went home. So we didn't cut anything, but we looked at cash management and cash flow, and that alone saved us millions. So we were able to, I think, be innovative in how we went about it. There are certain things we can never cut and never touch, I think. I mean, we'll work with the legislature on all of it, but mental health, SUD, DCYF, the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, DD Community. These are the types of programs that in a tough economic times usually need a little extra help. So we've been very adamant about pushing forward on those programs. We've inherited really broken programs in 2017. We've gotten them finally working again. Pandemic kind of threw a wrench in everything, all parts of our lives. But as we come out of this thing, we got to get back to understanding where those priorities need to be and just make tough decisions.
Area of disagreement between you and Senator Feltes, and we were just talking about it with him a few minutes ago, is the minimum wage. And it's obviously an issue that is of interest and importance to the business community because it applies to all businesses. He favors what he described as a gradual increase in the minimum wage. Where do you come down on that in your belief of should we look at increasing the state minimum wage? Should we continue to follow what happens at the federal level? How do you approach that issue, and why do you think it's important for businesses?
Moving the minimum wage to $15, as the other side is proposing, would be a disaster for our economy. There's no doubt about that. One of the number one metrics that correlates to minimum wage would be your poverty rate, right? Well, we have the lowest poverty rate in the country. We have virtually nobody making minimum wage. You can have absolutely no experience, even in the middle of this pandemic, walk in and become a dishwasher for $12, $13 an hour, right? And that's as low as you're going to find right now. So by creating a strong economy, minimum wage isn't really an issue here. The few people that are making minimum wage might be a high school worker that's making tips or an entry-level worker making tips or something like that. So it's not that nobody makes minimum wage. I think it's 0.2% of our workforce is on minimum wage, and even then, 80% of those are off minimum wage within a couple months. So it's very, very rare that you're making minimum wage, usually very extreme circumstances. And that's because we don't have the government force wages upon businesses, because businesses, when you allow them to compete, end up paying every dollar they can for good workers. Nobody can find workforce right now. It's unbelievable. So they're paying top dollar as they can. Dan Feltes has absolutely no management experience in anything. He's never managed anything. He's never had to read a P&L or understand what the dynamics of a balance sheet mean. And so when you're going through and going to manage a multi-billion-dollar budget, you have to understand you can't run the state like a business, but you can bring those principles into play. And to understand that there's only so much you have in your labor pool, right, as a business, whether you're running a flower shop or you're running whatever your business, your BAE, right? There's only so much in that labor pool, and when you start doubling minimum wage, you create labor compression. Something has to give. It's jobs, it's hours. So it creates job loss. It creates loss in hours. It creates a net loss in overall wages in your community. And study after study after study, whether you look at what happened in Seattle or San Francisco, and some of these cities that mandated these massive minimum wages, the cities became completely unaffordable. Everyone lost jobs and hours because of it. It's a nice political talking point, I suppose, but look around in the state. I don't think it's getting them anywhere because people know who's making minimum wage. Very, very few folks. We have such a strong economy. We have some of the highest wages in the country on average for a household. Those are all great metrics, and that's where, again, we have that not because the government says so and tells a business how to run themselves. It's because we let business do what they do. We let them compete. And that's why all these businesses want to be here. That's why all these families want to move here.
So you mentioned in your answer to that workforce, and workforce development is a huge issue for the business community. It was probably the number one issue I heard about prior to COVID-19. I expect it's going to be an issue we're going to continue to hear about coming out of COVID-19. And there's lots of elements to workforce, but I want to ask about a specific one, which is housing. And we hear it every day in the greater Manchester region in southern New Hampshire that affordable housing, accessible housing for really all levels of the workforce is a major pain point. And that we need to add more housing if we're going to be able to grow our workforce.
Absolutely.
And what priorities would you legislatively support or you want to drive in your next term if reelected that can help us address that issue?
So I created a workforce housing bill in the last session that because of COVID, it never really got a public hearing. We're going to bring that bill back. And what that bill did is it looked at not just Manchester or Concord or Nashua, it really looked at every city and town across the state. No city and town can be exempt from the responsibility of creating quality workforce housing. Because if you don't do that, the businesses aren't going to come. If the businesses don't come, you don't have a tax base, the whole system starts to fall apart. So what this bill did was created incentives through tax credits with the private sector that allowed, hopefully incentivize, not with a stick, but with a carrot, if you will, incentivize those public-private partnerships between the cities and towns and those businesses to create and invest in the workforce housing. One of the major problems that we have is that certain towns get it. Rochester, Londonderry, Salem is doing some good stuff. Certain towns are building that product. And certain towns are saying, not for us. No, we're not going to have an apartment here. God forbid we should have an apartment. It's very old school thinking. It's very 1995 thinking. And ultimately, it just hurts your community in the long run. So we're trying to kind of re-educate, if you will, all the cities and towns, all the planning boards, not, again, through a stick, but through punitive measures, but really incentivizing them to make those investments. Because at the end of the day, that's the bulk of your tax base, inviting those businesses in. And when you are at we're already at 3.8% unemployment. It's just unbelievable. We were at 17% a few months ago. So already we're seeing massive amounts of workforce pressure that we had pre-pandemic is already building up. But if they can't live anywhere, they can't work, right? And this is just workforce housing for nurses and engineers and, the run-of-the-mill folks, everyday type folks. People come to New Hampshire so they don't have to commute a long ways away. So folks across the state have to make those investments. Small town of Walpole or Jaffrey, there are little towns across the state doing a really good job of making those investments, doing it in the right way, right? Mm-hmm. That fit the context and the culture of their town. But there's new ways of doing all of this. It becomes more affordable, more sustainable, better materials. They become really, really great projects to be proud of. And we want to bring those models to all the cities and towns across the state.
I want to ask about homelessness because it's an issue that we hear about a lot in Manchester. I think it's certainly been, in hearing from our nonprofit partner, exacerbated by the impact of the pandemic and added additional complexity. And it's something that you've talked about as well. What do you see as the state's role in helping communities like Manchester, but other cities, other communities that are facing this as well, in responding to this and making progress on it and bringing resources down to the local level that will help craft the type of response that will help forge progress?
Well, the state has had essentially a homelessness plan, if you will, for many, many years. And we use it every year. We update it all the time. And what we're really looking at is what resources go to the cities and towns at what level so that they can provide the tools needed to manage a homeless issue. So what might happen in Claremont might be different than Manchester, and what happens in Manchester might be different in Newfields, right? Because it's not just cities, it's every town. Everyone has to deal with this issue at some level. We've put more money into the homelessness issue than any administration, and it ain't even close. I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars, a lot of it right here in Manchester. The CARES Act money allowed us to expand the physical infrastructure for homelessness, which was great. So we sent a lot of money there. So, I mean, we're not talking hundreds of thousands. We're talking millions and millions, tens of millions across the state. Many, most of that, I think the plurality of it really comes down here in Manchester. Now, the city has to decide how to spend those dollars. The city has to work with their providers to figure out exactly where those resources should go and how they should be spent. We always provide that backbone infrastructure at the state level, if you will. But every city is going to make some slightly different decisions, and that's fine. That's local control. So we're always working with individual groups. We had the big cold snap a couple years ago, if you remember. Rochester really stood up, created an emergency shelter. We helped them come in and just make sure we were always there. We always want to make sure that we are the backstop and we're always there for these folks. But the money is not the problem. We have so much money going out to these issues. It's about getting making sure that the dollars are flexible, making sure there's accountability at the local level, making sure the dollars aren't being wasted, frankly, on one-time money on operational programming that then after a few years disappears because it was one-time money. So one-time money should go for infrastructure. Operational dollars should go for operations. So we've been, I think, very aggressive on the resource side. I think a lot of it is also the state provides a lot of training, if you will, a lot of education to cities like Manchester so they understand how these issues work, where to go. what the dynamics might be. I mean, the number of hours that our folks at Health and Human Services spend in Manchester and some of these other cities, just helping them understand, here's the resources, here's how you can and cannot spend them, is inordinate. I mean, we spend so much time here. So it's an issue. It's always been a major issue. We know a lot of folks come to Manchester in particular, so we want to provide those community-based resources and services, not just here in the center, in the Queen City and in the center of the state, but really more community-based services is, I think, where ultimately we need to go, not just with homelessness issues, but mental health services, SUD. The more programs like that you have out in the communities, the less of a gravitational pull Manchester becomes. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you know, the high dollar needs of citizen services don't just fall on one community. So community-based services are really where we need to go.
So we have a couple minutes left. I want to get to two more quick questions. One of the most important functions of the governor is the appointments you make to various commissionerships, judges, state officials that perform a lot of tasks that impact, you know, every citizen in some way. You've been in the job for a number of years now and have had to make a lot of appointments. What criteria or process do you use to make sure that you're putting the best person in the right job to serve the people in New Hampshire?
So I can tell you whether it's a judge or a commissioner or the board of dietitians, whatever it might be, I can tell you what we don't do. We don't have a litmus test. We never ask somebody, how would you vote on this issue? We never ask somebody what their political party is. I don't do that. And I put Republicans up, I put Democrats up. I've nominated Republican judges, I've nominated Democrat judges. So we've had a very successful run. This past year, it got very political at the Executive Council. First time, I mean, I used to be part of the Executive Council. First time in ages you had seen this kind of, they just weren't treating people with the respect, I think, that they need to be treated with. I think Councillor Gatsis has done a tremendous job. I think Councillor Pignatelli in Nashua, the way she's treated some individuals, I thought was terrible. I thought how the way Councillor Valinsky treated individuals. Ryan Terrell and Eddie Edwards and Gordon McDonald, unbelievable citizens. So the question is, what do we look for? Folks that want to stand up, folks that just want to serve, folks that just believe in their community. They're going to put the hours and the hard work in regardless of political party. They just want to help out and have something to bring to the table. Maybe they think outside the box a little bit. Maybe they're looking at things a little bit differently. That's usually a really good thing. So it's really the character of the individual. And we have so many great individuals here in New Hampshire to choose from. So we have the opportunity to not just keep doing the same old thing and not letting politics get in the way. It got a little contentious this past year, but I'm confident with the new Executive Council we can get back on track.
That's a good segue to our last question that we have to wrap up, unfortunately. But I've asked all the candidates this today. We're in a very polarizing election cycle right now, and it seems like when citizens disagree on politics, they're further apart than ever before. And I'm wondering, if reelected as governor, what are some things that you could do either in policy or practice or how you conduct yourself in public that you think can contribute to bringing people closer together and forging more progress?
Well, I got to tell you, I take a lot of pride in, I think, the success that I've had bringing folks together. I think people understand our transparency. They understand that at the end of the day, when you throw politics aside, you're getting rid of that very negative variable. And that's why we've been so successful. My opponent always says, boy, the governor vetoed all those bills. Well, you bet I did. There was over $1 billion of taxes and fees and electrical surcharges and all that kind of stuff. Of course I'm going to veto that all day long. But look at what we've gotten done. I signed more legislation in 2019 with the Democrat-run legislature than Maggie Hassan ever did. I'm not knocking Maggie, of course, but I'm just trying to show, look at all that we have gotten done. We had a lot of success, whether it was, ensuring that folks were protected with pre-existing conditions, whether it was the COLA, the cost of living increases we did for municipal employees, which was very successful, working across the aisle. We've done a lot together, and I think that's why we've been successful. I think people know me. They've gotten to know me, I think, a lot, especially over the pandemic. They know my approach. They know my style. Folks might not agree with the politics all the time, but I call the balls and strikes like I see them every single time. And I give everybody, regardless of political party, the same shot. Every time they walk in the door, here's how we're going to sit down and work things out. And if you can keep politics out of the equation, we're going to be successful as a state. And if you remember what the New Hampshire Advantage is all about, right? Limited government, local control. The job is not about us as individuals. The job is so much bigger than us. The job is about those individual cities and towns, those individual businesses, those individual citizens. They need to come first in the equation. And when you do that, that usually helps get politics out of the mix.
Governor, I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I know it's a really busy time right now, but we greatly appreciate it. Best of luck going forward.
Thank you.
And thanks again for being here.
Anytime.
All right, everyone, that wraps up today's Congressional and Gubernatorial Forum. Again, want to thank our presenting sponsor, Bellwether Community Credit Union, our advocate sponsor, Eversource, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. I want to thank our AV partner, Events United and Studio Lab, for helping us pull off this virtual program. Be sure to tune in to our other virtual programs that we'll be putting out through the remainder of the fall. A lot of great opportunities to connect and stay connected with all the cool things happening in our community. And be sure to be on the lookout also for the clips from today's forum that will be shared with our members. Send them out to your friends and family and colleagues so that they are aware of where the candidates stand on these important issues. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon.